and let you take over.
Very good. Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. Sorry about the technical difficulties. As always, I appreciate the opportunity to go ahead and team with Bill a little bit. It's always exciting on a Saturday over coffee to potentially share some contemporary issues in project management. As you can see by this big picture, we have a new PMBOK guide. For those of you who have tried reading this, I'm sure it's put you to sleep or given you a headache. Today, what we're going to do is we're just going to take a look at chapter number 13 and talk about some of the new innovations and some of the new tools that PMI has come out with for stakeholder management. As we said in the invite, you can manage stakeholders or they will manage you. So with that, what we're going to do is just give you a real quick overview of what is in Chapter 13, Stakeholder Management. And from that standpoint, I want to share with you what I think is a very compelling story. I think the Project Management Institute does a very, very good job in terms of stating, if you want to be effective in managing your project stakeholders, this is what it's going to take. I also want to share some tools and techniques that are very new to the 6th edition of the PMBOK. As a matter of fact, I've shared them with Bill, and anyone who wants copies of this slideshow or any of the tools and techniques, and they're mostly Excel spreadsheets, is more than welcome to request them.
Hey, Dan, sorry, Dan, real quick. Do you want to hit that hide button?
Hide, sure, okay.
It should, yeah, perfect, thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. I thought I was the only one who could see it. I thought it was my little secret. Thank you, Bill. And we'll take a look at some of these tools and techniques, and I'll opinionize a little bit. As always, for anyone who's ever been a practitioner of the Project Management Institute and read the PMBOK, there's a lot of things that you need to know if you want to pass the test, but some of them you kind of shake your head a little bit and go, is this something that I really would do? So with that, let's go ahead and march through. Project stakeholder management begins at the very beginning of the project, and it goes until the very end when the final I has been dotted and when the T has been crossed. And within the new project management body of knowledge, there are 4 processes. This is not a big change from the 5th edition. So what happens? Initiating process group. Recall what the initiating process group is. We're going to develop a project charter. We're going to try to make sure that everybody, management, our team, we're all on the same page. And we want to go ahead and get this thing approved. The goal of a good project manager is to move good projects forward and stop the bad ones from happening. But as soon as that project charter is approved, and realistically, as you're developing the project charter, you develop a tool called a Stakeholder Register. And I personally think that this is a great tool. It's not only a great tool if you're a project manager, but if you're a process manager, if you're an operations manager, or any type of manager, you should have a Stakeholder Register. In essence, this Stakeholder Register identifies stakeholders before they identify you. It should define exactly what the expectations are for the stakeholders, and this is something that you want to go ahead and coordinate early and often. Very realistic. The second step happens in planning, and PMI recommends that you develop a stakeholder engagement plan. And you may notice that engagement is in red. And why the red entries? Because this is a change from the 5th edition. Previously, the stakeholder engagement plan was referred to as a stakeholder management plan. However, nothing much besides the definition or besides the naming convention has changed. This engagement plan says what you should do is take a look at all of the stakeholders on your stakeholder register, determine where they are currently in terms of interest and motivation, and develop strategies to move them to where you need to go. Now, this makes sense. However, PMI also recommends that this become part of your project management plan. I'll share a little bit more on my opinion of that a little bit later. But while this is a great concept, it could potentially be an accident waiting for a place to happen. Once we're executing, we have the process called managed stakeholder engagement. In essence, we develop strategies to move people from where they are to where they need to be, or to sustain their level of interest and commitment. This third process, if you will, is designed to go ahead and implement our strategies. We're going to see if they're working. We're going to see if our stakeholders are where they need to be in terms of commitment and interest. And the fourth process, monitor stakeholder engagement. This is where you're keeping your eye on the ball. You're evaluating your strategies, you're evaluating your stakeholders, and you're asking yourself the question, is this working? If it's working, keep doing it. But if it's not working, the definition of insanity is over and over again and getting the same results. Change your strategy, because if you can change your strategy, maybe this strategy is going to work out for the better as well. So it's a four-step approach, and I think it's a pretty good story. Figure out where your people are and who are the key stakeholders. Determine where they are currently in terms of motivation and commitment. Develop strategies to go ahead and move them or sustain them to where you want them to be, and continually update your plan and update your strategies if they're not working, and add new stakeholders as you go. So from a practical and logical standpoint, I think this is pretty good. Now, stakeholder management, the logic. Identify stakeholders or they will identify you. Classify their current commitment state. Step number 2, compare current commitment levels to desired commitment levels and develop strategies to move or sustain. Put your strategies into action in step number 3. Add new stakeholders and transition out the old. Use your primary tool, effective communications. For those of you who have not recently read the PMBOK, the number one tool and the number one interpersonal tool that you have in your toolkit to manage stakeholders is effective communications. And then in step 4, monitor strategies. If they are working, stay the course. If not, change your strategy. Now, you'll notice I have in the little circle the question, does this make sense? Personally, I believe it does. I think that this is a great methodology. Many project managers, unfortunately, sit behind their computer and load Microsoft Project and send out emails. Unfortunately, this is not going to get you to where you want to go. So let's go ahead and take a walk through each one of these 4 steps and do a little bit deeper dive in the short time that we have together. Identify stakeholders, the highlights. So what is our goal? We want to identify stakeholders regularly. We want to analyze their interest, involvement, influence, and potential impact on project success. Here's what happens if you don't identify stakeholders. If you don't identify stakeholders right up front, you assume. And I can take that word and I can break it out into 3 words. It makes a donkey out of you and me. If we don't identify stakeholders and let them know early on, this is the project and this is where you fit, then this is an accident waiting for a place to happen. So this identify stakeholder step is going to result, if you look at the very bottom of this slide, in a stakeholder register. And this register is a list of individuals. Now, idealistically, what you want to do is you want to define what their roles are, where they fit in the project, and you want to have a meeting before the meeting. Some project managers do a stakeholder register and they send it out, but they just assume that once people receive it, if we build it, they will come. That's a poor assumption. Develop your stakeholder register, have meetings before the meetings and staff it to make sure that people are aware of what the expectations are. And if you will, work out the problems before they become problems. Now, you'll notice that we have a couple of inputs that are new. Business case and benefits management plan. The business case is a similar input from the 5th edition of the PMBOK, but the benefits management plan is something brand new in the 6th edition. Now, within the PMBOK, there's just a quick overview of you should have a benefits management plan. I'm going to take it one step further, and I provided Bill with an Excel spreadsheet. I'm the kind of individual, for those of you who know me, if you give me a concept, I need to actually put it together and see what it looks like. I have a copy of a benefits management plan. Now, briefly, why would we want this? Because a benefits management plan essentially looks at a business case and says, here is the promise. If we implement this as a project, here's the cost and here's the benefits. Why have a benefits management plan as an input for stakeholders? Because if there is a promise that is made in terms of cost and benefits, this may point us to certain stakeholders that are impacted and may allow us to reach out to them before they reach out to us. Now, there are some tools and techniques that are recommended for developing the stakeholder register. Questionnaires and surveys. Interesting. I don't know how realistic that is. I know that in the past, I've managed projects and sent out questionnaires and surveys and got back literally nothing. However, in your project, if you have some budget for incentives, maybe a Starbucks card, and if you don't like Starbucks, something else, then perhaps that will get some people on board. I found that the best way to gather data, rather than questionnaires and surveys, is something that's not listed in the PMBOK. That's the good old-fashioned one-on-one interview. Now, PMI recommends that you do some initial stakeholder analysis in terms of what is their potential influence, their potential impact. How could they hurt or help this particular project? And you want to go ahead and put that into your head. And that's good information to have, but I caution you in terms of sharing that information with the world, because sometimes you may offend people. And there are a lot of different stakeholder mapping activities that you can do, and I'll share a couple. Now, the key output is the stakeholder register, and look at this, a new kid on the block. Update your assumption log. You may be thinking, wait a minute, I'm familiar with the PMBOK. What on earth is an assumption log? Well, that's another new tool that our friends from PMI have come up with. And if you wish, I'm more than happy to go ahead and share that tool with you. Bill has a copy of it. So let's go ahead and take a look at this data analysis representation, and going back to the previous slide, what is this stakeholder mapping? There are two common methods to determine where a stakeholder is currently and where we want them to be, and to go ahead and classify them. In the upper left-hand corner, we have the salience model. I think this is kind of interesting. According to the salience model, you evaluate individuals, you evaluate stakeholders on three criteria. Number one, their power. What do I mean by power? The power to impact your project negatively or positively. This is an individual who can make a difference, maybe good, maybe bad. The second area, I kind of smile, legitimacy. Sometimes you have what we call wannabe stakeholders. Well, wannabe stakeholders are different than legitimate stakeholders. The definition of a stakeholder is anyone who is impacted or interested. Impacted is the most important. Interested is nice, but it's definitely not a must-have. You evaluate the legitimacy. How much of an impact does this project have to this particular stakeholder? And then the third area of the salience model is urgency. Now, urgency is how excited are they about this particular project? How much are they pushing this project? And you'll notice I have 8 numbers. So what is number 8? Number 8 means that you have an individual who has no power, is not really legitimate, and has no urgency. So while PMI doesn't provide any real guidance on this, this would probably be the individual that you least worry about. Now, you notice that we have numbers 1, 2, and 3. Well, maybe some people have power, but none of the other 2, legitimacy and none of the other 2, and urgency and none of the other 2. Well, you manage them a little bit more aggressively, but not much. Now, you'll notice we have 3 yellow numbers. These are individuals who have 2 of the 3 characteristics. You want to spend a little bit more time with them. And if you have a lucky number 7, this is somebody who has all 3 of these. You probably want to spend some quality time drinking some coffee with these individuals, and you probably want to schmooze. Schmooze, definition, do whatever it takes to be successful, just short of losing your dignity. And the good news is, you define what dignity is. These 7s, you really want to go ahead and spend a lot of time with. Now, PMI also is very excited about another stakeholder evaluation methodology called the Power Interest Grid. And for those of you who want to get certified from the Project Management Institute, if you want to take that PMP or CAPM test, you definitely want to put this grid down and you want to memorize the different quadrants. So power, once again, the same as the salience model, it can either be high or low. And this is the ability to go ahead and impact or influence people and your project. But on the bottom area, on the x-axis, we have interest, and sometimes that's low or high. So what would we do? We would evaluate each individual in terms of the power interest grid. So looking up in the upper left-hand corner under Keep Satisfied, we have individual A. So individual A has high power and low interest, but we're not done with this model. Once we put this classification here, we have to ask ourselves the question, are we happy with A in this high power and low interest model? If we don't want to generate a lot of interest, but we want to periodically tap into their power, then we just want to keep them satisfied. But what would happen if we wanted to improve their level of interest? We would want to move A from keep satisfied all the way over to the right-hand quadrant, manage closely. We would want to move A to B. And that would require a little bit of strategy, because just keeping them satisfied is not going to get them to the point of where they're interested. So manage closely means sit down with them, have that cup of coffee, and as I shared in the salience model, go ahead and schmooze. Now, sometimes you may have individuals with low power and low interest. And if you look at individual D and C, if you're happy with them there, what does it mean? Monitor minimum effort. I'm going to go ahead and paraphrase it. Ignore them. When they send you emails, just say, thanks, nothing happening, no problem, do your own work, don't need you. But if you need to move them and move their level of interest, then you're going to have to start communicating and keeping them informed. So it's a good little model, and you can use that to your advantage, but be very careful with this particular model. If you put names in this particular model, here's a hypothetical situation. You put someone down in D, and they find out about it. First reaction, so you're telling me I have no power, huh? Well, I may not be too high in the food chain, but I'm here to tell you, I can influence your project. Just wait and see. And then they're going to look over here going, low interest. This may invoke an emotional response. Oh no, you're telling me that I'm not interested. I am interested. So everyone will want to be moved over to this manage closely area, and this totally becomes a waste of time and effort. Now, the benefits management plan, as promised, this is a new kid on the block. When I say new kid on the block, the PMBOK 6th edition says, this benefits management plan should be an input for your project charter, and it should be an input for your stakeholder register. This benefits management plan, according to PMI, is developed when business cases are developed. And a business case is a high-level overview of a potential project. What is a business case? A business case says, this is what we want to do. This is why we want to do it. Here's the cost and the benefits and any risks. Some business cases are approved and some are not. For those business cases that are approved, PMI recommends that you put them into a benefits management plan. And I personally think that this is a great idea. One of the biggest shortfalls I believe that many project managers have, and not really project managers, but organizations, a project may be approved in January to accomplish A and B. By the time the project is complete in December, it accomplished C and D, and no one really has an understanding of what was supposed to be delivered versus what was delivered. So what do? For every business case that is going to become a project, you start out with the strategic alignment, high, moderate, or low. High means this is something that is very, very important to our organization. Low, probably a nice to have. Very easy, project start, project end, and who's the benefits owner? This is the individual who most cares about any potential benefits. Why do we care about this for stakeholder management? Because if somebody is a benefits owner, you definitely want to reach out to them early and often. Now, there are different types of benefits, intangible benefits, maybe morale, productivity, things that you really can't quantify. Intangible benefits, these are the hard benefits. These are benefits that could be cost reductions or, excuse me, cost savings. When will the benefits be realized? Very, very important. Oftentimes, management will approve a project thinking the benefits are going to happen immediately. Sometimes they don't occur until the very end of the project. Critical success factors and key performance indicators. How is this particular project going to move the dial, so to speak? And any assumptions and risks. This is a great document to go ahead and have and maintain. I don't know, however, that this is going to be a document that is going to be built and maintained by a project manager. I think this is probably more pertinent to a portfolio manager or a program manager. However, if your organization does not have a benefits management plan when it goes through its fiscal year planning, that's probably not a good thing. So This benefits management plan is available to you because the price is right. We're going to charge you $0.00, and my good friend Bill has a copy of it. Now, I'm sure you would have attended this seminar just for the benefits management plan, but there's more, an assumption log. As I was looking at the new PMBOK 6th edition, I'm going, assumption log? Never heard of that before. As a matter of fact, in previous editions of the project management body of knowledge, the assumption log or assumptions was something that you just incorporated in the project charter. But PMI has said, and I have a tendency to agree with them, that assumptions and also constraints are very important, and maybe they deserve their own little tool. So I drank the Kool-Aid. I developed an assumption log. This assumption log is an output of the project charter. Pretty interesting. Realistically, I think for a small project, you wouldn't need an assumption log. You could incorporate it in the project charter. But for a larger project, maybe it's not a bad idea to have a standalone. Now, though it's called an assumption log, we really want to log our assumptions, which are things we believe to be true but haven't validated, and our constraints, which are those things that we have no control over or may limit us. So how does this assumption log work? You assign a number to each assumption log. You categorize it as an assumption or constraint. This risk register, anytime you have an assumption or potential constraint, you have a risk that is about or waiting to happen. This is another, let's just say that this would be a course of a different color, so to speak. But when we are working and we're putting risk into our risk register, the initial risks come from our project charter, and we continue putting in risks as we go through planning. But brief description, what is the assumption or constraint? Assign an owner to this. For those of you who have been in my classes, I have a very, very favorite saying: know what you know what you don't know, and surround yourself with people who know what you don't know. If you don't assign an owner to a constraint or an assumption, then you are assuming, and it is going to make a donkey out of you and me. You want to make sure that somebody takes control of this and monitor the status. Have we put it into the risk register? Is this something that is occurring? I kind of like this idea for an assumption log. Again, from my realistic, logical standpoint, I look at this and say, for a large project, I think this is probably something that I want to have. But for a smaller project, I probably will forego this and just include assumptions and constraints in my project charter. But now, believe it or not, I do more than just project management. I do process management. So what happens if I'm a process owner or a process manager? This is a great tool. And I'm going to go ahead and use this tool to my particular advantage to go ahead and manage my process. What if I'm an operations manager? Well, maybe I use this as well. So when I look at these tools, they're specifically designed for project management. But when I get excited and I actually sit down and put the pedal to the metal and create these new tools, I like to determine if they have more application than just through projects. And I personally think the assumption log does. This one has been around, like the Timex watch, takes a licking, or the Energizer bunny, takes a licking and keeps on ticking, the Stakeholder Register. Now, notice how this Stakeholder Register is formatted. This is not per PMI guidance, but it satisfies the PMI guidance. Name, organization, and role. For those of you who are going to be involved in any kind of project management, you need to understand the term RACI. Now, R-A-C-I, R, responsible for doing work. A, accountable for outcomes. So I may have somebody who doesn't do any work, is not responsible, but could be accountable. In our little webinar, Bill now is accountable for the outcomes. He's the one who has to coach this technical idiot named Dan through Web Ninja and finally get me on board. And it seems like we always have a little technical glitch because I'm not the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree. But eventually, once we get online, it's a lot of fun. But I'm the R. I'm responsible for doing this work, but Bill's more accountable for the outcomes. C, subject matter experts. Well, every one of you on this particular call are potentially a subject matter expert, because hopefully as we're going through this, you're having your own thoughts thinking, how can I apply this to my world? And then the good old I, inform as the project progresses. Notice we have something called version here. Whoa, that is super important. The Stakeholder Register is not a one and done. This Stakeholder Register needs to be updated. New stakeholders are going to come on board and older ones are going to go. Now, I do deviate from the Project Management Institute and the PMBOK in one sense. Notice I put a comments column in here. Had this been strictly through the PMBOK, it would have said classification. But I'm not going to put a classification on my particular stakeholder register because sometimes classification might be taken as the wrong way. For example, I say Bob and I put in a classification. He's not necessarily on board with this particular project, and I send this out to the world. That's an accident waiting for a place to happen. I would put down Bob, and under the comments, I would say, I need to sit down with Bob or need to better explain this project to Bob or need to provide the value proposition to Bob. I'm sorry, the realistic world of project management, there are politics, and the way that you phrase things can really move you forward or get you into trouble. So this is our meatiest area of this particular little webinar. But when we identify stakeholders, here are 4 things that I can share. Number 1, early and consistent identification of stakeholders is a must to manage a successful project. Stakeholders are going to make or break your project. And if you don't identify them early, they're going to be very upset with you. People are going to be upset and they may not support you. They may feel like you left them out. They may feel like they were disrespected. Reach out to people early and often. Stakeholder Register, point number 2, should be developed and shared with all impacted. Gain initial commitment and manage expectations. This is so important. Don't just blindly send this thing out and assume everybody's going to be on board. If you're assigning somebody with an RACI or a combination of those 4, you need to sit down with them and you need to explain what the situation is. And you need to take a look at the eye contact and their body motions that they're giving you and go, what are the nonverbals telling me? Is this person really on board or not? Caution. Be careful when classifying stakeholders. Not all stakeholders are motivated and committed. This information needs to be kept close hold. I know that there was a project manager one time who shared with me that they had done everything according to the PMBOK. They had drunk the Kool-Aid. They had classified individuals just like the PMBOK tells them to do, and they sent this classification out to the world. It was not received well. Benefits management plan is an input, assumption log update as outputs. They're new, but I share them with you because I think that there is some application to them as well. So I know that we're 34 minutes into this, but we've gone through the most important section of it. You have to identify the stakeholders first before you can do anything with it. All right, so the second process, managing stakeholders, the highlights. I like to refer to stakeholder management as herding cats. And you may not think this is a cute graphic, but I do. There's 5 of them, as a matter of fact. And if you've ever tried herding cats, they do have a mind of their own. Well, how does that apply to project management? Your stakeholders, your stakeholders definitely have a mind of their own. So what's the goal of managed stakeholder highlights? Identify current versus desired levels of interest and commitment, develop effective management strategies that guide interaction. And this is not a one and done. This is something where you're going to have to continually evaluate new and existing stakeholders as states of commitment will change. Let's say that we have Bob, and Bob is a happy camper, but a change came through and we're going to eliminate one of the features that was near and dear to Bob. Well, guess what? Bob's going to go from supportive and leading to possibly resistant. He's not going to be a happy camper. So unfortunately, states do change. The key output is recommended by PMI as the stakeholder engagement plan. And this is what the stakeholder engagement plan can look like. And for those of you who are going for certification, you'll notice that we have 5 different roles. Definitely memorize these and be aware of them because they're going to show up on the certification test. The stakeholder engagement plan, again, used to be the stakeholder management plan in the 5th edition of the PMBOK. Very simple. You put down the name of the individual, their current state using the commitment designators, where you want them to go, and a strategy. So what are some current states? Unaware. Well, if a stakeholder is unaware of the project, maybe you want to keep them unaware. Well, maybe your strategy is to not send them any information about the project. My grandmother used to say, sometimes too many hands spoil the broth. Now, you may have a stakeholder who is neutral. Maybe you're happy with them neutral, but maybe you want to move them to a higher state. This next designator, resistant, this is what's going to get you into trouble if you go ahead and share this with the world. There's an old saying that I learned many, many years ago: praise in public and punish in private. And if I put down somebody as an R in the current state and I send this out to the world, I am punishing them. I'm basically telling them that they are just not supportive of the project. And then if my desired state is supportive or neutral or whatever the case may be, and then I come up with a strategy, wow, this is like a time bomb. Now, other states, supportive and leading, minor distinction between supportive and leading. Supportive means I agree with the project, but leading means not only do I agree with this, but I'm happy to go ahead and move forward. Now, I know that this is on a slide coming up, but PMI recommends this is the very first plan that you complete to put into your project management plan. I would like to go ahead and share with you that this is a great plan. You have to do this as a project manager. Evaluate your stakeholders. Just don't assume that they're going to be at a level of commitment where you need them to be. But should this really go into your project management plan? Should this become a matter of record? I personally believe that that is a Scooby-Doo rut-row moment, and it's going to get you into hot water. So for PMI, the stakeholder engagement plan is the first plan created. So if you're going to take the certification test and you're asked, what is the first plan that you develop when you go into planning? The project charter is approved. Pre-baseline is complete. You've now entered planning. It's the stakeholder engagement plan. And if you're sitting in front of the computer taking the test, the answer is, oh yes, I will put that into my project management plan. But in the real world environment, notice I have a big red caution. PMBOK states this is part of the overall project management plan. With that caution, share this plan publicly and anticipate lots of pushback. Lots of pushback. As a matter of fact, going back to my story of the young project manager from Boeing Corporation who did this, it almost ruined her career. Keep this plan close hold. As a matter of fact, I would probably not put it anywhere electronically where other people can go ahead and access it. As a matter of fact, this may be something that's in my little folder, and I just basically run a copy off it and I go ahead and hand scribe it. Only share with valued members of the team and other key stakeholders. All right, moving along, what do we have? We have our stakeholder register where we identified all of our key stakeholders. We have our stakeholder engagement plan. We evaluated them in terms of current level of commitment and where we want them to be, and now we have strategies. Step number 3. Manage stakeholder engagement. What is the goal? This is where you implement your strategies in the stakeholder engagement plan. This is where you move stakeholders from C to D. And I'll give you a little hint. So what do? Just send emails. Wrong answer. There are a couple of key skills that are required. And for those of you who are going to be wanting to know as much as you can about PMI, there's a new skill that hasn't been addressed in previous editions of the PMBOK. How to give and receive feedback. Try to learn as much as you can about that. This is an area that has not been broached in previous PMBOKs, but it's very, very important. There is an art to giving and receiving feedback. And this particular feedback, sometimes you may get negative feedback. And how do I go ahead and deal with this? This is a mainstay from previous editions of the PMBOK, conflict management. Out of scope for this particular webinar, but there are 5 different conflict states and 5 different conflict methodologies, and know those. More and more importantly is cultural awareness as well. Especially here in the Seattle area, we work in such a diverse environment. We have people from different religions and different countries and different cultures abounding, and that's a wonderful thing, but you can't use a one-size-fits-all methodology. Negotiation, observation. For those of you who are wondering, what is MBWAT? In all of my workshops, seminars, and the books that I've written, I stress one thing. As a project manager, don't be sitting behind your desk sending out emails. MBWAT, management by walking and talking. It matters. You can get more done in a 3-minute face-to-face conversation than you can, in many cases, with 3 hours of emails. Political awareness. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, there are politics involved in project management. You may have individuals with very, very open motives, but some with ulterior motives. And when I first became a project manager, my manager gave me a little sign that said, "The psychologist is in." And I questioned that and I went, "What do you mean?" Well, as a project management, I've learned that sometimes you are the psychologist and sometimes you have to go ahead and feed the political situation and you have to live within it as well. And again, a course of a different color, but ground rules. One of the things that is now highlighted in the new project management body of knowledge is something called a team charter. And again, out of scope for this particular knowledge area. As a matter of fact, it falls under Chapter 9, Human Resource Management. But this team charter is a way of establishing ground rules early for a team and getting everybody to agree with it. And for some difficult projects or complex projects with a lot of moving parts and people, maybe that's a good way to establish ground rules. You update your communication, stakeholder engagement, and look at this. For those of you who have read the PMBOK before, lessons learned register, give me a break. Again, another new kid on the block. If you love the assumptions log, and if you love the benefits management plan, you'll love the lessons learned register. I read about this and I said, I think this is a good idea, but I'm not a real kind of text guy. And in the PMBOK, it says you should have a lessons learned register. And here's a couple of things that you might want to go ahead and do. If you're studying for the test, or if you actually want to be a good project manager, maybe this is something that you go and use. It's an Excel spreadsheet. So lessons learned. First of all, lessons learned. Number one goal for those of you who want to get certified, help future project managers. That's the help future project managers. And for lessons learned, don't do these just only at the end of the project. You want to do it then, don't get me wrong, but do this normally as each phase or each deliverable is completed. Every lessons learned should have a number. You can categorize it and take a look at these categories: challenge, problem, realized risk, and opportunity. And when you get this slideshow and when you get this, highlight this, because you may likely on the new PMP certification test have a question: what are the basic categories of lessons learned? Challenge, problem, realized risk, opportunity. Trust me, PMI is going to put it on the test. Brief description, owner. This is a key theme, ownership. If you don't assign ownership for risks, for lessons learned, for assumptions, then frankly, everybody's going to look at each other with a deer in the headlight look and nothing's going to get done. Recommendation and proposed actions. If lessons learned are important to go ahead and document, you should have some kind of an idea, what am I going to do with this? And just a real quick question, have I placed it in the quote unquote repository? Sometimes people go, repository? What repository? We don't have a repository. And if that's the case, then you probably want to create one, because this is great for a project. But if I'm a program manager, I'm doing this. If I'm a portfolio manager, I'm doing this. If I'm a strategic planner, I'm doing this as well. So I think this is a great idea. I like the idea. In the previous editions of the Project Management Knowledge, it just said do lessons learned. Now it actually puts together a tool for you to document lessons learned called the Lessons Learned Register. And I kind of sort of think this is a good idea. And again, it's available to you because you're here. So a quick summary of step number 3, managing stakeholder expectations. This is by far one of the project manager's most challenging processes. If you recall the initial slide that I shared with you, it said herding cats. Many project managers try to do it my way. It was a wonderful song, one of my favorites, I Did It My Way. But unfortunately, a one-size-fits-all management strategy is not going to be effective. Here's Dan's tip. Know your stakeholders. They're all different. Communicate effectively and understand that what worked today may not work tomorrow. And project management is not an individual sport, it is a team sport. Enlist the support of others, leverage relationships, and win as a team. If there's a stakeholder that perhaps for whatever reason you just don't hit it off with, maybe, just maybe, you have somebody on your team or somebody that you can work with, leverage that relationship and ask them to go ahead and help you with this as well. It definitely takes a team. So we're almost to the end part, and that's great. We'll still have about 10 minutes for any questions and answers that you have, even though we started a little bit late. Monitor stakeholder engagement. This, in the previous PMBOK, was called control stakeholder engagement. What is the value of changing this control stakeholder engagement to monitor stakeholder engagement? I think this is probably some fun that PMI can have on a test question. To me, control stakeholder engagement, monitor stakeholder engagement. This is tomato, this is tomato. Here's the goal. Update your strategies when they are not effective. I think I have this on the next slide, but what is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and getting the same results. And those results are not effective. If a strategy is not working, if you have somebody who is resistant and they remain resistant, don't keep doing the same thing that you're doing that's not getting results. Think out of the box a little bit and try to figure out exactly what can I do to get them moving forward. This is not a one and done. There's going to be new stakeholders coming. There's going to be older ones, and not old in terms of age, who are getting off the project. You want to go ahead and continue and onboard the new. You want to keep the team in perform. You're wondering, what is perform? Hold that thought. One of the key aspects of stakeholder engagement is knowing that the team building model created by Bruce Tuckman and augmented by Hursty and Blanchard, this is something that is going to be a challenge, keeping the team at a really high performance level. Keep a keen eye out for new issues and risks. Address them when they happen. One of the worst things a project manager can do is to use the ostrich approach. Stick your head because, hey, I'm sure that if I ignore it, the problem will go away. It won't. Use multiple management and interpersonal skills to win the day. As a matter of fact, when you read the new PMBOK, almost any one of the interpersonal skills, influencing, effective communications, coaching, all of these come into play when trying to monitor stakeholder engagement. And it's not a one and done. Know that things will change. I want to go ahead and share with you a key stakeholder engagement tool. It's the Tuckman model. And I share this for two reasons. Number one, I know some of you on this particular call are looking to become certified and take the certification test, and that's a good thing. This will show up on it. But even if you're not interested in taking the certification test, this is a reality. Your goal as a project manager is to get people up to step number 4, performance. But I will tell you that it is a difficult task. And if you have 10 different people on your project, you may have 10 different people at different states in this particular Tuckman model. So step number 1, form. The team comes together. This is something that you definitely want to strategize, and your strategy is to tell them what the project is. Tell them what is going on. Our Stakeholder Register, which is the first step. This is a great tool to help you form, to bring the team together. Hi, you're a stakeholder on this project. Here's my expectations for you. Give them the information they need to know what. But eventually, most people are going to go into the storm. And notice how productivity lowers when we go into the storm. Sometimes the psychologist is in. You need to develop a strategy. If things are not working, if you're not getting that person motivated, if you're not generating their level of interest, then you need to come up with a way of selling them. Think about step number 2 and step number 2 in the stakeholder management process. Manage stakeholders, that stakeholder engagement plan. This is where you're developing a plan of attack on how to effectively sell people to get them to the higher levels of performance. Norm. In the norm, this is where there is a project focus. There's room for improvement. What do you need to do as a project manager? You need to go ahead and stop telling and selling, and you need to start participating. Don't keep hammering people.
Dan, can you hear me? We lost audio.
Motivate them. Matter of fact, individuals who can't. Quick stakeholder management summary. Management begins in the earliest stages of a project and is not complete until the final T is crossed and I is dotted. Project Management Institute provides an overview of multiple tools and techniques designed to help you in your journey, and arguably, stakeholder management is the most challenging of all PMI's knowledge areas. So with that, I say thank you, one and all.